Plain Truth, a show where we try to get into some of the mysteries and the dirty underbelly of the world around us. I'm your host, Paul, and joining us this week, we have James Evan Pilato, who is rather well known in the world of alternative media for his work with James Corbett and then also with Media Monarchy. James, are you there?
I'm here. Thanks so much.
Well, I appreciate it. Glad you could come. And along for the ride is my friend Jerry. Jerry, are you there?
Hey, James.
Hey, man.
Okay, well, James, why don't you tell us a little bit about your, I guess you'd say, alternative media work, how you got into this, and what you have been focused on.
Do you want the long or the short?
Well, again, we try to keep it under 90 minutes on the show, so how about the short version?
That could be the
That's
long.
90 minutes now, James. I know.
I think, honestly, as a little kid, I grew up in a kind of small town in West Virginia, kind of a conservative Christian upbringing, not super strict, but I was kept away from a bit of music and movies and things. So I wasn't really allowed to go see movies or buy music. We still had a television. Again, it wasn't super strict. But I would kind of try and get a lot of my music and movies just from the friends that I would be able to be with and hear stuff and see stuff at their places. And basically at some point, I was allowed. Dad quit the church, and then things kind of changed around the house a little bit and got a little looser. And then I was allowed to go to the movies. So once I was allowed to go to the movies and allowed to then records and all that, I dove in kind of head first and have never really looked back. And it's always kind of been my driving passion. But I spent tons of time, growing up in not only record stores, and we can still kind of do that to this day, but video stores as well. I've kind of thought about this as, recently that, video stores as we knew them are, for the most part, extinct now. But I spent a lot of time in movie rental stores, too, and just looking at the boxes, looking at the covers, looking at the credits, looking who made this and who produced what. And I've always been kind of fascinated and interested and had just a super nerd brain for the names and the companies and the labels and all that kind of stuff. I've always enjoyed it, and it was always really easy for me to remember for whatever reason. So as I got older and then, got turned on into even more and more music and tried to play music with friends, and I guess fast forward to then the internet happened. So the internet happens, and you had even more access to media and music and things, and I knew I always kind of wanted to do something on it. And I early on tried to, I was kind of a Wikipedia editor and tried to add pictures and do things just to sort of be involved and kind of contribute. And then I realized I could just set up a blog and do that for free and start to sort of post and maybe just write about music and movies and again, media. And at some point within there, my girlfriend at the time and my partner to this day, she actually came up with the name Media Monarchy. We were always just kind of playing with names of possible, band names or projects. Again, just being nerds and making up band names for bands that don't exist. But it was only until 9/11 and post 9/11 that I had the interest. And how it ultimately happened was, and I've told this story many times, I only got into all of this, if you call it, alternative media, 9/11 truth, food truth, all of it. It started from my own natural, again, media gobbling curiosity of 9/11. Hey, what's the video of the plane hitting the Pentagon look like? I don't remember seeing that, and kind of typing that up and trying to search for it, and then quickly realizing, we've never seen any of that. And probably within those searches right there, it were things like Alex Jones and Dave. Now his name escapes me, but some of the early kind of 9/11 documentaries, and you see Michael Rupert and all of that. So once that kind of hit me, it pretty much blew everything wide open and blew my mind. And even though throughout my music years, I'd listen to Dead Kennedys, listen to, provocative political leftist punk and activist kind of music, But it was only after 9/11 that it was sort of all kind of laid out in a way, and it all kind of opened up, and I was able to really start reaching wider and making connections, and then realizing that's what I want to do with Media Monarchy. I was energized to then basically try and make a blog and then do a podcast. And then it just sort of slowly and surely grew as I was here in Portland and started doing a live version on an internet radio station that was here in Portland that was kind of halfway pirate, and there were some other pirate and low power FM and internet folks who actually then started to carry my show live, and it grew and grew and grew. And then I, early on in probably 2006 I made those early kind of connections with, Richard Grove of tragedyandhope.com and James Corbett of CorbettReport.com. And those dudes kind of to this day are folks that I'm so glad to be kind of associated with in any kind of loose way. And as you've just said in the intro, to be with someone like Corbett as his, he's just exploded, and I've just tried to kind of keep up and stay along for the ride. So that's maybe the long version.
That's the longer version, but we still have 90 minutes. But James, thanks for that. I think the real thing is, the point is that just about everybody can do something, right? I mean, if your background is in music, fine. If your background is in, whatever, media, food, whatever, that's another interest of yours, food. There's just so much that all of us can do. And it won't change the world by one person, but if thousands of us do it, look at all that James Corbett has achieved.
Yep.
Quite a lot. And for listeners who aren't aware, James Corbett's video on 9/11, the explanation of that is a classic.
His satirical one?
Yes.
Oh man, it is. It's such a stunner, and it's funny, of course, in any kind of either sort of activist or even sometimes just a creative pursuit. It's sometimes the things you slave over, blood, sweat, and tears. People are like, yeah, that's all right, and then the thing you whip out in a minute, people are, that's amazing.
Hey,
yeah.
James, I've got a question for you. Do you find that you mentioned like one of the first things that you started looking into was like the Alex Jones videos, and that seems to be a common thread amongst a lot of people that, when they first start looking at this stuff, he's kind of the first place you go to. Do you find that you still refer to Alex Jones, or do you think, have you sort of moved past that?
I still see their news, follow their Twitter feeds. I get the daily email from them. And now that makes it so much easier to stay up with other people's work. But yeah, I mean, back in those earlier years, you're always going to the website and looking for updates and hoping something new is there. I think a lot of it was the timing too, because at that moment that we were all starting to look for that stuff, his was already pretty much the most prominent, because he had already by then been around for several years talking about these sorts of things, or at least close enough to. And ultimately, I think, and I listened to him a bunch, and then you completely burn out. And once I kind of reached a burnout point, I haven't listened to the show in years and years. What they've built, I think, is amazing, and should be kind of an inspiration. And that was always the thing. Ultimately, I think regardless of which side folks come down on someone like Jones, it's that he always kind of said, you all can do this yourself. And I tried to take that as the rallying cry. And that's exactly what Jello Biafra of Dead Kennedys said. And that's why I took his words as my rallying cry of, don't hate the media, become the media. But I think the more media you make yourself, the less time you have to listen to other folks.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I guess from my perspective, Alex Jones sort of used to be seen as the alternative, and now I think he's almost seen as more the somewhere in between the mainstream and the alternative, I guess.
And maybe that's ultimately, that's the cycle of things, and there's going to be something else to kind of come along and update it and learn from the predecessor and try and innovate, and feel like that's probably the same in arts and in activist media.
Another question. You talked about being a Wikipedia editor. Have you seen any of the videos of like the Israeli government sort of coaching people into how to edit Wikipedia to have a pro-Israel bias? And what do you think about that?
No, I haven't seen that specifically, but I know that Wikipedia is fraught with all sorts of problems and problematic issues, and it's always there was a long stretch where I knew it felt like the only Wikipedia pages I was ever on were the ones that had some kind of flag at the top, preventing, or this page has been this or that and you can't edit it, and the controversial fun ones that we all wanted to look at. I haven't seen that specifically, but I mean, from Israeli government to U.S. government to U.K. government, they're all sort of paying shills to go online and troll comments and spout the same kind of talking points all over the place. And you see these sort of, you're never sure if it's spam or a robot or an actual person, but it's some kind of mix of all of that.
Yeah, they've got it down to a science now, for sure.
It's all part of the game. I mean, once you've seen some of these robotic comments more than, say, 2 or 3 times, it's a robot, really. Whether it's a living robot or a real robot or whatever, it's just part of the game. So it's hard to worry about that so much. But hey, James, speaking of this kind of stuff, you worked with Clyde Lewis, right? You worked in, I guess, what you would say is kind of the more mainstream of conspiracy radio. Any thoughts on how that, what shall we say, things like Coast to Coast or Clyde Lewis, or how or Alex Jones for that matter, how do you see that going? Do you think these shows will get bigger and bigger, or?
I don't know. I mean, something like Coast to Coast is fairly legendary, but yeah, I worked as the producer of Ground Zero with Clyde Lewis for about 18 months. Mm-hmm. And it happened because we both live in Portland, Oregon. So I had been introduced to him through, I don't know if you guys ever know of Alex Ansary. He did a show called Outside the Box.
On Oracle, I think, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
but also did a TV version of it, public access here in Portland. So it was through Alex Ansary. And again, I met Alex Ansary because in 2005, 9/11 truthers were all seeking each other out. So met up with him, and then he introduced me to Clyde Lewis, who was basically doing these weekly, what he was calling Ground Zero Lounge, and they did it at a bar here in Portland called Dante's Inferno. And every Monday night he did this 1 hour, presentation where he had PowerPoint, he had his topic and title and theme and thesis, and he would lay it out, and there were microphones also set up so anyone in the audience could get up and yay or nay or agree or fight or do whatever. And it had loud rock and roll music intro, and it was I enjoyed the show of it, and it was it was truth or topics put into a tight kind of fun rock and roll format, and I enjoyed that. And he and I, then in 2000, what would be in 2010, I guess, the 9th anniversary of 9/11, he and I kind of pulled a successful kind of media stunt here in Portland. This was when is it Terry Jones, the Quran burning and all that crap that was going on around the 9th anniversary of 9/11. It was building up, and there was all the hype, as there is every 9/11 anniversary. They hype up some kind of phony baloney attack that's going to come, but we don't really have any actual intelligence on anything. So it was all the book burning fervor, and I think between the two of us, we were like, dude, let's burn the 9/11 Commission report and send out press releases and tell the local news agencies that we're going to do it as a statement on 9/11. And on the 9th anniversary. And so we did it, and actually one local news station did come out, and they included us as the last part of their sort of 9/11 segment, which went through the anniversary and the memorial and the stuff in Ground Zero and in New York and all of that, and then the current book burning controversy, and then ended the story by saying, and back here in Portland, some folks burned a book of their own. And I got to go on local television and say, if the commissioners, are all on record saying they felt like they were underfunded and lied to, and people quit and called it a disgrace. If the people who did the commission don't believe it, then why should we? And I got to have that, on television. So Clyde and I pulled off a good media stunt, and he got back on radio here in Portland and actually got picked up nationally. So when his show got picked up nationally, the company was hiring to have a producer because it meant the show was going to be 5 nights a week for 5 hours. Whereas before, when he was back on the airwaves, it was just once a week, and it was kind of easy to come in and didn't need a whole bunch of folks on hand to be able to run the show. But for a national show, you needed to hire a producer. And I basically saw that and asked him about it. And I think as soon as Clyde knew I was interested in it, Clyde pretty much said, James is the dude that I would want. So I pretty much got the job sight unseen just because Clyde said, I want this guy as my producer. Clyde knew my work in Media Monarchy. So for me, it's always been, I've never really believed in a lot of paranormal kind of things. And I try, in the show to kind of have that balance because, he does a lot of paranormal. He'll do, a wide range of stuff. And I liked the topic and the connections and all that kind of stuff. And ultimately, his show's a pretty big success. And, he's on for 5 hours a night. 3 of it goes out national. The last 2 hours are heard in the Portland area. A ton of folks, whenever the show ends in their market, they then go to their computer and go get the stream. So there's a dedicated fan base there, and folks, love to talk to him. I think for me, I started to look across the hallway at this radio company that I still work for in Portland, and there's the cool rock and roll station across the hall. So I always was, my pendulum, like I said, kind of swings back and forth sometimes, but I now produce a morning show on a kind of heritage old school rock and roll station here in Portland that's been around since the late 60s. And that's been a huge blast, and that's now let me do a lot more stuff that I enjoy just as a lifelong music lover. So I enjoyed the time that I did work with Clyde, and I think ultimately shows like his and Coast to Coast will probably always be around, and especially, we're a week away from Halloween, and whether it's, Halloween kind of things or the crazy, insane news that we kind of have year round, I think.
It's always Halloween now, isn't it?
It's always Halloween, and in a way it's always Halloween if you're taking that kind of angle of those kind of shows. There's always going to be bizarre kind of occult conspiracies going on, or at least seemingly going on.
Hey, James, it might be a good time to segue into a book I'm reading right now, which is Dave McGowan's latest on Laurel Canyon.
Nice.
If you want the weirdest of the weird, that is the book for you. Laurel Canyon was quite a place.
And that stuff fascinates me, man.
It's like everything: serendipity, occult, darkness. You name it, everything. All the adjectives are to be found in that little place. And certainly government or above government kind of manipulating of the agenda, so to speak.
Well, and that's a whole interesting area. All the most talented artists of the 60s, they just all happen to have parents, involved in the heavy intel military industrial complex.
Amazing. And then the thing is, it didn't go away. In that book, there's a quote from a manager of the Clash, the rock band The Clash, which was later, where essentially he'd been charging that the Copeland brothers, which is the Police, and then pretty much that family brought the whole new wave punk to the fore, that this was all like a CIA project. They were all working for the CIA. This is the head of the Clash talking here, the manager of the Clash.
Uh-huh.
And we can't prove this, but certainly when you look at the punk new wave scene, I think you see a similar story.
Interesting. See, and that's something in a way that I guess sometimes, you have at least some, maybe we all have our selective blinders sometimes, that it's like, these are the things I investigate, and this is the rock and roll I enjoy.
Well, it's sacred for you, James. Right? Right. Some people can't accept the idea that, that the U.S. government would lie to them, right? Some people can't accept the idea that, Elvis Presley would lie to them. You know what I mean?
That's probably what has always kind of driven me to love bands that have an independent spirit. And so even if they're not necessarily making overtly political music, they sort of live it in their life of, we make music on our own. We're not on a major label. We do our own thing, and we do it, sustainably and well. I admire that kind of work, whether it's a band or whatever kind of artist or someone who does try to work in film or comedy, for that matter.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of room to say that things are manipulated at the top, but not totally controlled. And there's lots of great music that came out of the 60s and 70s, and not everybody who had something to do with Laurel Canyon was working for Tavistock.
But the section of, and this is something that I don't know if McGowan gets into it as much as somebody like Peter Levenda does, but the whole Manson, Beach Boys, that intersection.
Well, he definitely gets into that in David Crosby and the Process Church. But I think the interesting thing about the story from Laurel Canyon is just that it all kind of interlocks somehow. You know what I mean? It's not like there's one connection from A to B. It's more like a jigsaw puzzle where every piece is touching 6 other pieces. It's really quite interesting. I recommend the book. I definitely recommend the book. I think a lot of people will never look at rock and roll quite the same again. It's really...
Then it can almost kind of spoil it. It's like, what?
Maybe it should be changed to sex, drugs, rock and roll, and the intelligence agencies
behind them. Well, but again though, it's like people, grow up thinking that Hollywood is so wonderful, right? But if you spend any time in that area, you realize there's a lot of darkness in Hollywood. Stanley Kubrick couldn't stand it and ran away, fled to England. Said it was so dark he couldn't stand Los Angeles. So there's good and bad in everything. But I think that book is quite special, Dave McGowan's book.
Well, if you look at the modern like the rap and hip hop scenes now too, it just seems to be a continuation of the MK Ultra mind control stuff, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and that's where I love looking at the work of something like Vigilant Citizen, that kind of tracks a lot of the symbolism going on in pop culture, in media.
Yeah, Freeman.
James,
I was just going to say
Freeman.
Yeah, Freeman. He's got quite a bit of information on that as well. He's done exposés of some of the MTV Video Awards and the occult symbolism that they kind of do. But essentially, some of these NFL Super Bowl shows and the video shows are basically occult rituals.
Anymore, they all are.
I'm wondering if they were 20 years ago and I didn't know it.
Well, and Dave McGowan and Freeman were both guests that I booked at the time, or during the time that I was on Ground Zero.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts? What did you think of the case? Or
well, there's all kinds of variables on on some kind of live show where someone's calling in from somewhere else, and you don't know how. All those kind of variables, and you're not sure if you're going to be able to hit all the points. Sometimes live, some are better than others. But I think I enjoy at least the the different kind of guests and things to try and put on the air. I mean, ultimately, I looked at my time at Ground Zero of just being able to try and do as much subversive, dropping truth bombs as much as possible.
In your opinion, is terrestrial radio dying and things sort of moving towards the internet?
There's definitely a little bit of, it seems like that. Well, the short answer would be probably, yeah, totally. But they still have those airwaves, and they're still, cast a huge sway. But in a way, for me and my friends, it's like, man, I turned off terrestrial radio, or at least commercial terrestrial radio, decade plus ago. And really, for the most part, I enjoy the station that I get to work for. But when I'm at home and turn on radio, and the shower radio is only set to the non-commercial local jazz station, which is super sweet that we actually have something like that, because there's not really many jazz stations left in America.
The thing that puzzles me is how some of these big stations like Clear Channel are losing money year over year, but they continue to stay open and continue to broadcast. I mean, I half wonder if there's not an agenda to pump information out to brainwash people.
Totally. It's got to be what it's called, like a loss leader, something that corporations do. They know they're kind of taking a hit on it, but ultimately it's worth it. So yeah, that McDonald's in that town might not be the best seller around, but it's still worth. You have to have your brand there. So to them, it's like, yeah, we may take a little bit of a loss here, but ultimately it's for our grand scheme, and we'll just try and absorb that loss.
That sort of segues into another topic. You're quite an expert on the food industry, and I think last I read, McDonald's revenue is down 30% or something. Yeah. Do you think that's because people are waking up to the fact that the food is garbage, or do you think it's just that people can't afford it anymore? or a combination of A and B?
Actually, I guess I hadn't really thought about that. So maybe on both ends, people have left them. That there's people who can't even afford that, as all around us kind of plunging into this greater recession. And then on the other end, people who would look at it and finally go, okay, I'm completely done there. I've learned enough to know I can't go there anymore.
I think there's another angle, though. They're particularly collapsing abroad. I mean, they're, different countries like Russia, they're really falling apart.
Well, Russia, I think, was sort of a counter move against the West, right? I think he's sort of, he's using that to sort of punish the American corporations, I guess.
Yeah, but I think the angle is they're particularly vulnerable because their ingredients are so toxic, right? I mean, compared to, let's say, Subway, selling cheese, hoagies or something.
Yep.
McDonald's has got really toxic food. And, it's not hard to come in and say, well, what is this plastic, right? Mm-hmm. And more or less pressure them. But I think it's more than just Russia. I think their revenue has been falling in a lot of countries. I think they have a reputation problem. But how much is related to GMOs and how much is plastic and how much is the brand of America Incorporated is another question.
That's a great even kind of metaphor. You're exactly right. As the sort of this idea of this in your face, down your throat, happy meal BS that we've kind of been shoving all around the world, that suddenly the outside world got sick of it a long time ago, but now even at home we're all sort of just kind of, in a way, maybe just burn out and kind of disgusted with a lot of it. And for me, that's really become so much a part of the quote unquote fight, is realizing I don't have to be out with a bullhorn. It matters what I buy and what's in my medicine cabinet and what goes in my belly. And I, quit smoking cigarettes 2.5 years ago, not quite 2.5 years ago. But that was a huge step for me. I'd been essentially a smoker for 17 years. And at the same time, this was before I got the radio and Ground Zero gig. I had worked for 6 years at a local kind of organic grocery store chain here in the Portland area. And so I worked at a grocery store just as not only the 2008, econo crash happened, the economy imploded on purpose. And remember, that was that seamless handoff between Bush and Obama that we forget during that whole bailout was kind of,
I forget, did the president change?
Exactly. They worked on it together. I mean, I think there was even a point where Obama went in to Congress, or in backdoor meetings and essentially said, you guys, I'm going to be the guy. I'm the ordained one. Let's go ahead and move forward on this bailout and da-da-da-da-da. But now I got off on that.
Oh.
Get me back on track.
Well, anyway, we were talking about the value of America, the image, and you were at a natural health food store smoking, and you quit and, went straight, so to speak.
And that, I feel like, and I can't be alone, because I think we've realized I may not be able to personally stop, drones killing little kids. I may not be able to personally stop, NSA spying on any of those kind of things, but I can stop supporting companies with the food and the products to the best of my ability. And Portland is a great place to be able to do this. I mean, other folks in smaller areas, of course, could argue well that it's much harder for them to do that. But the more we all sort of try and work towards this, I think, and make the choices that make the difference, those are the things that we've seen. And that's why McDonald's profits plummet. That's why a lot of places are changing and immediately having to change, because when their crappy ingredients are exposed for being the ground up, gymnasium mats and pink slime and aspartame and high fructose corn syrup and all of those things that they're exposed to be, they a lot of times are backpedaling. Companies are now acquiescing because they've seen it and it hits them in their wallet. And that's, I feel like, the kind of the food/health movement has been one of the more successful, because it seems that it has, to some degree, made some actual kind of real world change. Now, the other big pharma and big ag are gobbling up all the formerly small independent companies, and that's a whole other scene as well.
To be fair, though, James, I mean, the FDA approves the gymnasium mats and whatnot, right? So, it must be okay.
Exactly.
Well, again, we get back to, do you trust the government, right? Or the people who own the government? Hey, James, in Oregon, they're about to vote on GMO labeling. Any thoughts on that fight?
It is now the most expensive ballot measure in Oregon's history, meaning the amount of money spent on the yay and nay side. And, of course, the side for yes, the yes on 92, measure 92, to label genetically modified organisms as such. Yes on measure 92 side has, some millions. The no on 92 side is just getting constant influxes and larger as the election looms larger. Influxes of cash from out of state, Monsanto, you name it, all of those, and the same folks who basically funded and fought and successfully beat the labeling initiative in California. All those folks are now lining up to kind of go against this. The nice thing, the interesting thing that happens in Oregon is we are a vote by mail only state, meaning we don't go into a booth on that day. My ballot is on my coffee table as we speak, and you also get in a kind of a newsprint thick pamphlet of every ballot measure, every candidate, every issue, all in a book. So you're able to actually take your time, do some research, figure out who's what and what's what, and thoughtfully vote on your ballot and drop it in way ahead of time. So the interesting thing is, as the race heats up and all this money starts to pick up and the ads, and it becomes it's the thing that makes people sick of watching television, rightfully so. It's the thing that makes people sick of watching TV and listening to radio. Oh, the political ads are driving me nuts. But the interesting thing here is they're spending a bunch of money trying to get votes that have already been cast. So a lot of it, in a way, hopefully, my hope is that the momentum is already on the side of the people who are just simply saying, I just want to know what's in the food. It's not going to cost more. It's done in countless countries around the world and hasn't raised their bills any more than they would have been raised already by your phony inflation of central bank currency. But we don't get into that when we're trying to talk about it. But I hope that the momentum is there and that Oregon will be the state to label GMOs. And again, that hopefully can be a move that other states will start to do things like it.
I'm curious who would not want to label GMOs and why. Why would it? If you don't care, then why do you care if they're labeled or not? Just don't buy them if they're. I don't get it.
Yeah, I think it's they're funny, not funny like exactly haha, but moments in interviews and in the media where even the news person talking to some crazy activist who wants to label these GMOs. There's a clip of the reporter sort of having the realization of like, wait, you just want them to say that it has GMOs on the label? Like, oh, that's all you want? Like in the clip, the reporter sort of has a moment of like, oh, well, hell, I'll vote yes for that too. Who wouldn't want more information for themselves and for their family?
Right, exactly. It doesn't hurt anyone except for the GMO companies who are afraid that they're going to lose sales, right?
The Kuciniches came through town just the other day, and actually I hope to have some exclusive audio of them up on Media Monarchy over this weekend, hopefully. But Dennis and Elizabeth Kucinich came through town, and they spoke at a Yes on 92 rally, and Elizabeth Kucinich made the great point, and I've already repeated this a few times, that to the lie of what's going to raise food costs so much and packaging and all of that, she's like, cereal boxes change their front packaging and design all the time for new prizes. It doesn't seem to change that all that much. You kind of think about that and go, oh, that's right. Those boxes change all the time. It's not like something that's set in stone.
Yeah, I mean, I'll pay the extra 1/10 of a cent for a sticker or something that goes on my green pepper that says non-GMO.
And I bet that's what a bunch of it. I bet we'll see sort of sticker assuming it passes. We'll start to see the extra sticker label put on products. When they haven't actually changed the box itself, they slap a new kind of sticker over top of it.
Right. I'm wondering how, like, I know Paul had mentioned some of the problems he noticed in Japan with the Fukushima leak is that some of the food grown in the more toxic areas is supposed to be, I think, labeled or is something. It's essentially cheaper, but basically, I think you said, Paul, that people were lying and saying it was coming from a different area. Now, I half wonder if we're going to start seeing the same thing with GMOs. If they do label it, are they going to just basically send the GMO crap somewhere else and stick a sticker on it, or I don't know.
It's going to be hard to avoid fraud. Again, anytime you have cartels getting involved in things, and whether that's the federal food cartel or your just friendly neighborhood local organized crime, I think that's when it kind of comes down to trying to do your food that much more locally, trying to eliminate that much more of a possibility of it being fraught with all these issues of fraud and corruption on this, big long chain. So, I mean, the organics food industry, I mean, it's already kind of been messed
corrupted.
Up and corrupted, and you can't completely 100% trust that anyway. You still have to kind of look, and I mean, we were talking about this the other day here at home, and it's like how this has natural flavors in the ingredients, and yet it is still labeled as 100% organic. It's like, what are natural flavors?
Ask your local MSG company.
corn syrup, maybe.
Well, see, that's the thing. Is the current situation is we have to trust manufacturers or farmers, because you really can't trust, I guess you'd say, the packagers and the labelers. So, you get all these, Whole Foods places that, I frankly don't trust them. They say something's organic from China, and I don't trust them. And then, even if you did trust them, they have these phrases like you're using natural flavors, right? Or what are some of the others? They have about 10 words that, to me, seem totally vague. They're not ingredients that I grew up knowing as ingredients.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they can say something like carrageenan, but I mean, I'm no expert, but can't you make some of these things in like two ways? One would be a natural way, and then one would be some factory thing that's got all kinds of chemicals in them.
Yeah.
So what can you say? It's a messy situation. But I wonder about the GMO thing, though. I think that seems to be losing worldwide. I don't know about in the U.S. Jerry, what's it like in Canada? Are GMOs kind of controlled?
Sorry. Yeah, they're not controlled, and what I find a lot of times is I'll go into a store and it'll say a product to Canada, and then you look at the sticker and it's like Mexico or Guatemala or whatever. So it's pretty bad here. And the other side of the coin is with our cold winters, we've got to import a lot of our stuff, and you just never know what you're going to get there. It's really hard to get decent produce. And a lot of it, because it's been sitting around and been in the shipping line so long, it's not very flavorful.
Mm.
But that having been said, I will say there is a big movement for local produce in the summer and fall here. So that's at least one good thing. And also, I think they've got fishing cooperatives and whatnot where you can sign up and get a certain amount of fish delivered all through the winter. So, there are good things, but it's a tough fight for sure.
I think the more people and it's been, some out of personal politics and some out of just personal finance, that we've had to start, doing things more on our own. And I think when you start to do it, you start to get more energized and excited by it. And the more you find yourself being able to remove your involvement in that system. So like I said, rather than, screaming and wailing and banging your head against it, just don't look and try and withdraw your consent. And that's maybe the things that make McDonald's fail.
Well, I'll say this as an observer here, the Portland, Oregon area is phenomenal for farmers markets.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's part of the trick is if you cut out the middleman, and these Monsantos and Archer Daniels Midland, they are, in a way, they've become needless middlemen, right?
And you find that
Catherine Austin Fitts talks about this a lot. We need to essentially, the bad guys, so to speak, the financiers and all that, are always trying to create choke points for us that lead to them being able to control us and also just charge us a lot of money. And we need to break out of their choke points. We need to have peer-to-peer, so to speak.
We need to starve the beast.
Yeah, of course. And Portland's working on that. These farmers markets are really good.
It's funny. I can't remember where I read it, but I read somewhere that in modern times, people are complaining that they don't have the time to do this and the time to do that, and that's why we sort of evolved into a fast food society. And they did research, and it turned out that of all the tasks and chores that people had to do before, the one that they enjoyed doing the most was actually preparing their own food.
It's more enjoyable, if you're able to actually have and again, you got to make the choices and make the time and try and be conscious about doing it. And again, then that's been something that like I said, my partner's, she's been fantastic in that way, and that we've both kind of, gone on this, sort of food journey, if you will. There's a great company, a service here called Organics to You that delivers local, in-season organic produce to your door once, every Monday, every other Monday, depending on, the size or frequency that you set up as a subscription. Doorbell rings, there's a box of produce on the door.
Yeah, we have that as well.
Nice. And it's that kind of stuff, again, that's just like Uber is revolutionizing and blowing up taxis. That Netflix innovated and blew up Blockbuster. Hopefully farmers markets and organics to use can blow up McDonald's and bad grocery stores.
And it seems like these corporations, I mean, and understandably so, but they always have such a resistance to change, right? It's like, I'm trying to think of the way to explain it, but I mean, I guess, that's their business model. So if things change too much, they're not going to make any profit, right?
Hey,
So,
Jerry,
yeah.
I might look at it a little bit differently. I don't know that it's that they're against change. It's that they want massive centralization, right? They want one supply of
Control.
a million pounds of almonds from the California Central Valley or something, right? And even if it would be cheaper to get them from different places, they don't want to do that.
Yeah,
right?
well, the whole thing runs on a central planning model, right? That's what the globalists want to move everything towards.
And so what it kind of means is, if you live in California, you're supposed to buy apples from New Zealand or something. I mean, it's like needless transportation seems to be the model. They just, they make a contract, again, like for 1 million pounds of apples, right? And then that's it. That's what they got to do. So it's kind of like, in a sense, what we want for the future is mass personalization, right? We want, like 3D printers and stuff like that. We want the ability to do things the way we want locally. We want the opposite of what they want.
Yeah, I would say in general what we're seeing around the board is a mass rebellion against centralization. I think people are decentralizing everything. I mean, I think they're sick of it.
Hey,
Bring
good news.
About 3D
news.
prints.
Yeah, well, 3D printing, that's going to, revolutionize things. I don't think it's quite as practical for most people as, let's say, the computer, because, you got to be able to design things, or I don't know, it's a little bit trickier, but nonetheless, this is going to revolutionize making things.
Yeah, well, but yeah, because that first wave of innovators and artisans are out there doing it right now, and even though the stuff they're making, it's kind of weird and don't really know exactly what you're going to do with this or that, but there are actual products and crazy innovations that have started, and then you see it's like, oh, you can make your own guns. I mean, what is that going to do to the world?
Yeah, and all kinds of technology is going to be hard to stop. They have these thing called maker labs.
Yep.
Right, which are kind of mixtures of woodworking, metalworking, CNC mills, 3D printers, all these kinds of things. And they're fairly affordable. There's one called ADX in Portland that's, I don't know, $80 a month or something for unlimited use of these different machines. And that also allows people who are trying to create a small company, right, a chance. If you want to become a carpenter, it could be awfully expensive with all the equipment.
Yep.
But here's a way to do it cheaply. So I see a lot of positive out there by people just going in and doing what they want and then kind of creating their own thing, just like you created Media Monarchy, or then, in a sense, kind of created your job in the, the industry there, whether it be Clyde Lewis or whether it be with rock and roll.
So this was a line in, there's the television show Mad Men, and there was a line in one of the early, of course, better seasons, where one of the characters, Bobby Barrett's talking to, the main guy, Don Draper, and she essentially says, make up a job and become the person that does it. And we've kind of taken that in a way as sort of another kind of motto, and that's really what's happening. And that's really, I think, the change that has really happened. And that's the change, again, that makes McDonald's fall apart and makes maybe commercial, media start to fumble and fail. And they're basically looking to the internet for the innovations and ideas and looking in a way almost to kind of imitate it in a lot of ways. So, I mean, in some ways, in a lot of ways, I feel like the battle's kind of already been won in some ways. And I think a lot of folks, maybe in my generation and younger, of course, are going to look at, there's no way that we're going to give our lives working 45 years at some company only to get laid off at the end when they ship the jobs. Like we've seen how this game is played in a way, and I think because we're not as apt to play nice with the corporate structure, I think now the corporate structure is going, oh crap, we may have this whole generation of kids who totally don't want or need us. So in some way, I think they're working media, television, all of it is working really hard to be the hippest thing now.
Hey, James. Okay, this gets into an important topic: is how do we deal with this happy face, happy meal fascism? This kind of trendy, like I just saw in the paper here, the new payment system from Apple for iPhones or whatever. You give your thumbprint or whatever, right? And it appeals to those who just kind of love Apple. I don't know how to say it, but Apple's got its own subgroup in America where people seem to love it no matter what the product is. And not trying to pick on Apple, but you know what I'm trying to say, that there's this trendy promotion in the media, right? And that's how they've been going after particularly younger people, I think, is saying, hey, it's cool to like give your fingerprints to Apple.
Well, and that's the counterpoint to my sort of giddy optimism of, we're all opting out. But there's basically anybody post 9/11, they have no idea. I worry that they only know a world of, terrorism
Facebook
and surveillance and thumbprints, and it's all completely normal. And, your pop stars perform bizarre occult rituals, and it's all been normalized. That, we're kind of the last folks who knew what it was like before and after.
Yeah, it seems like we're watching like I don't know, it's not exactly before and after Christ or something, but it certainly seems pretty dramatic. Before and after friendly fascist technology took over.
I might argue that the globalists don't give a crap about the West anymore anyhow, and maybe they're just pulling the plug on us, and they're gonna set up shop in the East, right?
Yep.
That's possible.
And perhaps, hopefully, in whatever collapse that might be, again, hopefully that would be an opportunity for people to suddenly kind of, but maybe because out of necessity in some cases, but would then take that as, it was like, well, all right, we didn't need them anyway. There was a story Corbett and I did on New World Next Week recently, the video series that we do, and we try and throw in, like positive news stories, or at least, things fumbling in the New World Order. And in those kind of points, I lost it. What was
well, you were saying that there are you like to post positive things in your show.
The police in Acapulco went on strike, but ultimately then suddenly all the people realized they didn't really miss them, and that traffic worked better, and that things were running pretty much more smoothly than that the police weren't around. So there was never the police went on strike expecting, they're going to beg for us to be back, and they're going to fold, and then we'll get our raise or we'll get our demands met. And then everybody's like, yeah, actually, we're good.
Yeah, I think in Mexico as well, they a lot of the people have determined that the police were so corrupt they actually banded together and formed their own militias and self-protection groups, and a lot of them ran the police out of town.
That's a good start.
Yeah, if only we could do that in North America. In America.
Well, I was going to say, because that would almost, take some kind of election. With the election coming up, the other thing we're voting on in Oregon is to legalize marijuana.
Hey, James, I'm here visiting Portland, and I went somewhere, and next to it was a greenhouse, right? And so, to show my age, I thought that meant environmental, right? Solar panels and stuff. No, That means medical marijuana. So times are changing. That looks like it's going legal around at least a lot of the U.S.
And the prices are going to skyrocket because, I mean, the lame... Dude, the totally lame part about it is the same fascists that profited from locking people up are going to now get to profit off of selling us the weed.
Exactly. You know it. You know it. That's the agenda. Hey, I'll tell you one thing that stands out visiting the U.S. I see an amazing increase in the number of quasi-authority figures carrying guns. Transit police carrying guns. This building I was in a minute ago that I'd been into many, many times over the years, now the guards have guns. And it's totally pointless. It's an office building. Actually, James, it's a building you know. It's in downtown. It's where Clyde Lewis is. Just like, what's the point? Why in an office building where it's a receptionist, essentially, not a security person, why would you need a gun? Right? And I think this is not because the crime is the problem. I think it's to basically indoctrinate people into the idea that everywhere you go, there's somebody with a gun, an authority figure with a gun.
And, I mean, kids getting the police called on them, at schools. And, again, this is all the post 9/11 amp up. And we've imitated, exactly from the Stasi and from Israel. We've incorporated all those, all those different styles of, boot in your face, gun in your...
Well, they say that Homeland Security has hired as consultants people who were formerly of the KGB in, planning, and I think even Marcus Wolf, the famous guy who was the head of the Stasi. So clearly we're in that direction. We're, looking for that, but it is kind of amazing. Hey, James, if you a slight turn here of topic, we just had this shooting in Ottawa in the Parliament building, I guess there. How have you seen the media play on that? Because I just looked at a Wall Street Journal, and they had on the front page a picture of the guy who's getting an award for supposedly stopping that, and I looked at him, and he looked like, I don't want to say he was zombified. He looked like he'd been brainwashed to me. But how have you been seeing the media play on this? Because I think this is likely to be used to change Canada a fair bit.
Absolutely. It almost seemed like, and just sometimes the nature of the media you see is kind of dictated by the other things you're doing in your life. I end up seeing lots of television now, but it's always on mute while I'm in the radio station. And it almost seemed like the news was like, oh, thank God we can freak out about some different thing than Ebola. Like, it was almost a happy, yay, here's a new crazy story. So they kind of went at it with glee for, the good 36-hour or so run. Then you got the Ebola guy in New York, so that kind of shifted it back again, and God knows what'll kind of happen over the weekend. But I haven't looked into the story a ton, other than to kind of note, and again kind of did this with folks that interact with me on my Twitter account at Media Monarchy, and somebody said, "So sorry, I joined, I got here late. Is it still multiple shooters, or has it shifted to lone gunman yet?" Kind of, said, I was like, oh, it's still multiple as we speak, and then kind of looked, and 5 minutes later, and then tweeted right back. I was like, no, it's lone gunman now. They already decided it's one guy.
Yeah, and the thing that strikes me about these false flags in Canada, I think the last one, I don't know if it was 2013 on Canada Day, was another pressure cooker bomb. And the last guy had an IQ of about 80. He was, fried out of his tree on drugs. And he was a recent convert to Islam. He was a Caucasian. And this guy as well is another recent convert to Islam, and he's also Caucasian, right? And, there's just these little things. And in both cases, there was a pending vote on a law to increase the police powers. And right before this vote, lo and behold, we get a terrorist attack to scare the hell out of everybody. I mean, it just screams false flag to me. And, I'm not saying that they made it happen, but maybe they let it happen, if you know what I mean.
Uh-huh. Well, and all these dudes are just, low level, doped up seeming, patsies who pretty much could have been talked into doing whatever, and then God knows what happens after, you not only give them money and weapons.
They may not even know what they're doing.
Well, the last guy in 2013, I mean, I don't even think the guy could have put a sandwich together, let alone a pressure cooker bomb. I mean, it's just preposterous. Now, I don't understand how people fall for it. One thing I will say though, that's slightly different was the coverage in Canada versus United States. The United States seemed to really drum up the Muslim angle, and in Canada you didn't hear quite so much about it. I'm not going to say it wasn't there, but they weren't really hammering it away like Fox News was.
I did see, looked up at the television, and there was, I forget what game it was, but some U.S. hockey game. They sang "Oh Canada." They sang the Canadian national anthem to show, solidarity.
Solidarity, yeah.
So I think you can look at it on a number of levels. Even if you look at it just from their own storyline, you would look at this and go, oh, so the more Canada gets involved in fighting the war of terror, the more terrorists are mad at us and want to kill us. So, well, let's stop. Any logical person would say, well, maybe we should stop doing that and stop creating future generations of terrorists. Even if you look at it on their, on the basic official story level, you would have to stop and say, well, it's because you're constantly involved in these, foreign excursions, because you're following along with the U.S. and the U.K., which is only proper since it's a colony of the U.K. And I think at the same time, there's still this sort of subtle, slow move to put some kind of, North American union together in a way.
Yeah, well, one other curious thing about this is that, England just tried to push through broader police powers not that long ago. And it seems like, the agenda gets driven somewhere at a higher level up the pyramid, and then all of a sudden you'll see Australia, Britain, Canada, you'll see them all launch these things at the exact same time, right? And I mean, that having been said, you can even go on YouTube and you can watch identical speeches being said by the Prime Minister of Canada and Australia and England. And, word for word, it's verbatim the same thing. So someone at the top of the pyramid hands these scripts down.
That's what's depressing about it. We're just watching them act as the robots we are afraid they are, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know what to do what do we do to stop that? I mean, you would think these things would go viral, and if people looked and saw the same speech being said by two different leaders, you would think that they would, rebel or something. I don't know.
Well, you would think they were human, but I quit giving them the benefit of the doubt on that one.
Yeah,
they're not so good anymore. But yeah, well, anyway, that's another topic, is how these shooters are presented, or these low-level patsies. James, what do you think? Have you seen the media coverage change over the years?
I find someone's work, like, I don't know if you ever look at Lauren Coleman of Copycat Effect. I like the kind of work he does. It kind of is, he sort of just lays out, these are the names and these are the places and the dates and the comparisons, and kind of keeps track of it, and doesn't really seem to be pushing any kind of agenda, but really draws, some interesting dots, and lines in the news that kind of unfolds. I think I mean, how many people keep trying to jump the White House fence? There's this insane, and it has to be that on some level. There's an almost kind of zombified insanity contagion that it seems to be kind of going around as society breaks down in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, it's because the food is complete garbage, and people feel like they have nothing to look forward to and no one to look up to. And I mean, the jumping of the White House, you see people are going to imitate these things. When it's just kind of the shooter stories, it feels like, oh, there's been another shooting. It's like, yeah, because that's all you talk about in the news. So anyone half deranged, whether they make it happen or let it happen, that's going to be enough to push it. Lauren Coleman had in his book had interesting statistics that showed there was, of course, Columbine in 99. There was a lot of shooter kind of stuff in 99 and 2000. But after 9/11, it was all sort of war on terror stuff, and they didn't report, shootings. Subsequently, there were less shootings. So I think the news changes, and it gets, it gets way more graphic and violent. And same thing with the same kind of, the television. I mean, the things as a kid that I saw in the 80s that were the 10 o'clock, like, oh, that's the 10 o'clock, kind of hour-long drama, the cop show or whatever, compared to the 8 o'clock shows now are I've looked up at the television and been like, oh my, that's that's gross, or I can't believe that's on television.
If you want to really be shocked, just watch the Disney Channel, James.
Yeah.
There is a general, seemingly kind of at the same time that a lot of people are feeling energized and activated and, making change in their own lives and around them. At the same time, there's, I think, a growing kind of sickness in a way.
Hey, James, speaking of sickness, visiting Portland, something happened here that seemed above and beyond the call of duty when it comes to sickness. At the Intel, as in the chip maker, at their facility, a worker left his kid in the car, and the baby died, right? Staying inside work for 8 hours or whatever.
Yeah.
Now, you'd say this is terrible, but there's a support group that has formed to support the father? This is amazing to me.
That this guy kind of has, somewhat support. And it's interesting that you raise that, because I kind of feel like, and I don't think I consciously kind of put it down, and maybe it's only now that you brought it up. There was definitely kids dying in hot cars, or parents murdering their kids in the car, copycat meme that was going through a bit of the summer.
Yes, I remember. But anyway, I thought this was particularly sick because, of course, if the guy had left a cat or a dog in the car, and a cat or dog had died, there'd be a support group to raise money to get this guy thrown in jail because of the animal rights fever. I just find that amazing. A baby dies, and you're identifying with the guy who screwed up and killed the baby. Wow, what has happened to this country?
I mean, you got to think if it's assuming it's all legit.
Yeah, assuming it's legit.
Basically, have people who can empathize with someone who's probably totally in debt, who works their ass off around the clock to try and have money to, that's devalued so they can buy crappy food for this kid. I bet there's a lot of people that kind of sympathize with it because they look at it and go, oh, God, that could be me.
Well, I guess, there's that phenomenon of women writing to serial killers and saying, please marry me. That's happened, countless times.
Yep.
I don't know. There's some fringe element of people who, I don't know, they identify with the guilty or something. It's kind of strange. But anyway, that really stood out to me. I couldn't believe that story, but that's what people are saying is true. And so that's an example of how ridiculous things are. Part of modern America.
I hear some modern America behind you. And
well, I'm going to apologize for the sound here. There are some people jumping around getting excited, so sorry about that, James. I
heard Elvis Costello behind you a few minutes ago, so that's all right.
Well, that at least you can have some sympathy, right? At least there's some good taste in the air, right?
See, and that's, I mean, to go back to that, someone like Elvis Costello, I'm a fan, love his work. He was kind of the angry, another angry young man, and had, political lyrics. And then everybody kind of gets older, and it's like, I guess, he's, He's pretty cool, but he's kind of part of the system. I don't know if he's been knighted. I think, anyone who actually takes the knighthood to me, I'm always like, oh.
Bono.
Exactly.
Well, he started as he struck me as a guy who wanted to be knighted, but that's another matter. But yeah, well, people when they're young and they want to change things, right? And then they gradually adjust and give up, I think. So that's another factor.
Well,
but,
we got through that, and in some way, I feel I'm going, I guess life is a series of compromises in a lot of ways. So you kind of try and navigate, because even though for all my, punk rock this and foodie that and blah, blah, I still live in a city. I still need, internet, still need to pay the, power bill. And
what are some other trends that you see popping up in the media world? For example, with things moving to the internet, is this going to kill the old line news, do you think?
I think that's why you see them sort of, I don't know if it's co-opting it, but I think now that mainstream media uses internet media, you can't look up at the television and not see, their Twitter address or their Facebook address or some kind of hashtag. And when those powerful corporations, who again still have people who listen to who basically listen to commercials while they're using gas to drive some, piece of junk to some job they hate to pay bills for, trapped kind of in that for people who are still unfortunately gobbling up a bunch of radio and TV, they're going to be the old line media is going to seem like the new media, I think is what I'm trying to spit out.
I've noticed one promising trend. Well, I guess in one way it's promising, another way it's not. But a lot of these sites, you go on the message board after the articles and people are just ripping them to shreds. And what I've found has happened, say, in the past 6 months to a year, is that all these sites now have moderated comments. So, you post a comment and somebody's got to read it and approve it before it goes on the board.
And that's actually, that almost brings us all the way back around when we were kind of talking about, sites and things earlier. The comment fields and message boards, for me, have I know a lot of the internet started as message boards and bulletin boards. I've never gotten much out of message boards and comment fields. I don't feel like I've ever gone through a comment field and scrolled to the bottom and gone, wow, I'm really glad I did that. I feel much smarter and I'm not angry at humanity at all. I think a lot of times it's not a really productive way of things. And, Corbett and I, agreed years ago. It's like, we don't comment on the New World Next Week videos. And fortunately, earlier on, there was a lot of stupid comments and, that guy looks like this. And, it was all this sort of just base, physical things. They don't like the way we looked or said this or did that. But the longer we kind of kept at it and did our consistent thing, a lot of the BS and trolls and jerks all kind of dropped away. And now, for the most part, actually, the comment fields on YouTube are, even if it's people still arguing, they're just arguing actually about the issues and the topics that we've raised. So I do, as the years have gone by, I definitely feel better when I look at the comments on a New World Next Week episode.
Well, I'm going to be frank with you. If you read the comments, it's not going to be an uplifting feeling, but I guess on the bright side, it's showing that people are not buying the propaganda and people are pissed off. And, I think that's a good start, being pissed off.
Well, it's a start, right? But I think a lot of people have recommended doing that to kind of to get a point across. And now I think the powers that be are just clamping down. But it was always, the signal to noise ratio was always a huge problem.
Yeah, agreed. And they have their trolls going in there and trying to steer the narrative and, the usual tricks, right? So
I think that's why I really enjoy something like Twitter. And Twitter was something I started to use just sort of out of, in running Media Monarchy as an online outlet. You register and set up accounts on some of the sites because just to make sure at least that you get your name. So I, at least at the very first, I was like, well, I'm at least going to make sure I get Media Monarchy. But the more the show started to grow and the podcast, and then I started, I set up a site dedicated to just do food issues and called it Food World Order, and set up a site to just do, space and technology and computer issues and called it Cyberspace War. As the Media Monarchy kingdom kind of grew, something like Twitter became that much more indispensable because I was able to keep up with stuff that I wanted to and sources that I wanted to follow. Again, as opposed to back in the earlier days, going to the sites and refreshing and hoping they had new articles. With something like Twitter, I feel like it's like that's my own comment and message board, and I can be commenting and messaging with people I want to and people I want to interact with.
Yeah, when Twitter first came out, I thought it was sort of like a Facebook for people with ADD, but I think it's really evolved now, and I think
content, like it's just purely like, here's the thing and here's the I like that there's no room for extra crap.
Yeah, it's sort of just one-liners, I guess, but it's certainly changed over the years, and it's changed for the better to my surprise.
And and surely again, I'm not saying they're as pure as the driven snow, and they do fight the government, kind of requests, and they try and, at least show how many requests are coming in, or data surveillance and all that kind of stuff. But Twitter is still actually their own company, and they haven't sold out to Facebook or to Google or to Apple, and they're actually their own company still. For whatever that's worth.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, tools are mixed bags. They help us and they help the bad guys, right?
I just assume everything I type and write is being recorded and stored somewhere. But quite frankly, if that's their game, if they want to be control freaks and get information overload, then by all means have at it. I'm beyond caring about it anymore.
Again, I have to choose we've got to choose our battles, and we don't get forever in this life, and that's been something I think as I've gotten older and continually try and grow up, that I realize it's like, I think something you do when you're young, you're always kind of planning and thinking, oh, well, when I'm grown up, then this will be set. And you're always thinking that things are going to be set in the future when blank. And you kind of now that I'm getting into my late 30s, realizing, oh, this is it. This is your life. That's happening right now. You can plan for stuff all you want, but you're living your life right now. And every day you're making choices about your present and your future, and hopefully those choices I make are things that can live up and stay true to what I always kind of joke as the 16-year-old me, the snotty idealist who thought he knew everything, and I want to try and stick with that as much as I can, and again look up to people who basically build their own media empire. So whether that's folks like Alex Jones or folks like James Corbett or internet, streaming radio stations like Soma.fm. I love them. They're a commercial-free music station of, 24 different channels of music, and they just take donations. That kind of system can work and can actually, keep things going. And I want to try and move in those kind of directions. Meanwhile, I've gotten the opportunity to do commercial radio work, and I kind of feel like I've gotten a nice kind of chance and gotten my break, if you will. And so there's part of me also too that's sort of making the compromise of saying, okay, well, I like working at this commercial radio station because I get to be, I get to play records and interview bands and go see tons of concerts. And for me, again, a lot of what this fight is all about is the fight to be able to live your life freely and with fun and with joy and love, and because it's not going to be around forever.
Yeah, well said. There's that famous quote from John Lennon about life is what happened while I was making my plans.
Yep.
And I think a lot of us, as we're getting older, realize, well, hell, just do what you want to do. If you wait for the perfect moment to start your own media, efforts, well, the perfect moment may never come. Just go for it. That's what you did.
I'm trying every day, trying to continue it.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, James, we've had you on for a good little time, which we appreciate. Is there any closing thoughts? Anything you'd like to mention? Anything you're working on? Or your website is MediaMonarchy.com, right?
That's the main flagship website, and the main work that I still do, even though my day job, I work as a radio producer, but I still do the weekly New World Next Week with James Corbett, and I also do my own new music podcast. So I also do a weekly hour-long podcast of new music. It's usually a dozen or so songs. I call it Pump Up the Volume. If you remember, there was a radio movie with Christian Slater that it was a huge influence on me in the late 80s, and doubtless influence on my life, kind of path. So that's the kind of stuff, that's the stuff I'm still working on while doing the other job. I was able to get a computer upgrade. So I'm hoping in the new year to start making, I'd like to make more videos, because I think that's another avenue that things have kind of moved towards. And when I look at, if I could try and be some kind of mix of something, hopefully like Corbett Report, mixed with something like, there's a YouTube channel that I like called The Needle Drop, and it's just a guy who does new record reviews. And it's not from any kind of truth or standpoint. I mean, he just reviews new music, and most of it, 99% of it is independent and is not very mainstream. He does really, really well. And in my mind, it's like, man, if I could put together a better synthesis of music, film, and media analysis that still has the joy of, I love film and music and concerts and all of that, but let's also look at some of the darker sides and some of the connections and expose some of the things that need exposing and support, the positive independent things that also need supporting. And I feel like if I could, in my head, I'm trying to kind of craft that as some sort of, another branch and another bit of growth, hopefully, for Media Monarchy. Because part of me also says, I don't know that I can work in commercial radio for very long I don't know that ultimately it'll really make me happy. And I think ultimately I'll only really be happy if I really go kind of balls out and try and make Media Monarchy my job. And doing something with a much heavier media, music, film angle would be something, like Vigilant Citizen. His web hits are insane. Something like that draws a big built-in audience, but to hopefully try and raise the conversation and talk about, popular culture with a critical eye. So hopefully I could use that as a way to, start a subscription-based Media Monarchy where I could hopefully try and make this my job. That's the dream.
Cool. I wish you the best. So again, thanks for coming. James Evan Pilato of MediaMonarchy.com, and that'll do it. Take care. That's a wrap for this week.
Thanks, guys.